Over the last few years, we've been blessed, or perhaps cursed, with a whole rotunda of Souls-like games. From your Lies of P to Strangers of Paradise, First Berserker, and now, Wuchang Fallen Feathers. While we've had plenty attempts at the genre, more often than not, we end up with a lot of missteps. I think a big part of that comes down to the fact that a lot of developers haven't quite worked out what exactly makes From Software titles tick. Wuchang is the latest in that very long conga line. A moody Souls-like that comes with all of that typical Souls charm, but also some of the little annoyances as well. Now, I'm just going to jump straight into this, and if I am sounding a bit off, it's because I'm recovering from being sick, so please bear with me. I had a pretty okay time with this game. Maybe even a fairly good time, but what you see is what you get, which isn't always the best thing. But it does tend to work out in most scenarios. From booting up the game, it was super familiar. A few cutscenes that make no sense, a few enemies teaching you the Souls mechanics, and a tutorial boss that absolutely smashes your face in. Truly welcoming you to the game and giving you a taste of that experience that you're most likely going to have moving forward. A lot of these kinds of games do tend to be very dreary and dark, and Wuchang is no exception. But there's also a surprising amount of vibrance across the lush landscapes you'll come across. It works really well since the game sort of leans into a whole yin and yang theme. It doesn't always blend in seamlessly, but the contrast works more often than not, and it gives this world a natural kind of breathing room. The art style in Wuchang is honestly what I wish Diablo 4 had gone with. In fact, some sections sort of made me feel weirdly nostalgic for a game that I never got. I constantly found myself wanting to boot up Diablo 4 while playing this game before remembering the state that that game's currently in. But it is a massive detriment that most of the time the game runs extremely poor, which I believe might be a PC exclusive issue. To be fair, it's not quite as bad as it was on the launch day. I believe there have been 2 patches, maybe a few more, that have done a lot of back-end fixing to get the game into a more agreeable state. And of course, you can use tricks like DLSS and other upscalers, but also, why should you have to if you're running some of the latest hardware? Even after those couple of patches, there are still some serious issues. There's things like texture pop-in and other technical hiccups which can be slightly jarring, but the biggest issue is the frame rate drops. I've never had a game drop frames in the exact same spot every single time without fail, when nothing on the screen was causing it. No flashy effects, no heavy rendering moments, and yet Wuchang manages to do exactly that. The funny thing is, in one of the posts by the developers, they actually mentioned that they were happy with the PC spec requirements and felt the game was fairly optimized, but would be making some changes to bring it closer to player expectations. So maybe they felt that way, but the people who were playing on PC definitely didn't. If you played this game on console, please drop down in the comments and let me know what your experience was from a technical standpoint. Now, being a Souls-like, the combat needs to feel tight above all else, but still leave room for exploration. The combat here is fairly well done, and the leveling system behind it is actually quite interesting. Probably a bit more interesting to me than many of the other Souls-like games out there, since it does try something newish by incorporating a talent tree that feels fresh, in a backwoods kind of way. My biggest gripe here is definitely the controls. Handling your character feels very stiff. It's not so bad playing on controller, but mouse and keyboard felt incredibly unfriendly. It's very rare for a game to force me onto controller. I even use mouse and keyboard for the entire Souls series, but this is what happens when I feel like I am fighting for control over my own character. On top of that, the positioning and recoveries feel very RNG based, even when they aren't. There was so many times that I was clipped during a mid-roll or thrown into a grapple at the apex of a barrel, which is something I've never seen in a Souls-like game before. And yes, of course, sometimes we all swear we dodged something when we didn't, but I had moments where I was in the middle of a roll, curled up like a noodle, only to get grappled out of it and slammed into the ground. There are quite a few times where you're going to struggle just to get back to your feet before the next hit lands. Being down in this game is brutal. Recovery is nigh impossible. You just clench and pray for the best possible outcome, really. Outside of that, the combat is really fun. The magic system weaves in and out of physical attacks really smoothly, and honestly, it's one of my favorite magical setups in the whole genre. I couldn't commit fully to either a pure melee or pure magical build because juggling both was far too enjoyable, and the game really supports a hybrid playstyle if that's the avenue that you want to go down. The talent system was thought out very well. While it's not a stop of the ages kind of system, there are so many branching options and different paths to build into that it feels like you're always shaping something unique to your own method. Resetting talents I wouldn't say is encouraged by the game, but it almost feels like the developers had intended for players to reshape their build multiple times throughout their journey. It comes with a very old schoolish design philosophy that does warrant tinkering, but the balance works extremely well. Now, for this kind of game, difficulty is a massive part, right? So the difficulty of the game does ramp up the further you go, which is pretty traditional, but you will hit a few walls if you're not paying attention. Although take this as a fair warning, if you're coming in hoping for that Elden Ring style freedom and spectacle, this leans more towards the structure of Dark Souls or Demon Souls. It's tighter, more deliberate, and a little bit more reserved, for better or worse. Just touching back on the mechanics for a moment, the game's madness system builds quietly in the background but ends up adding a good amount of tension. Every time you kill a human or die, your madness goes up. At 50% passive nodes kick in, at 90% you deal more damage but you take more damage too. At 100% you will lose all of your leveling resources while dying and summon the inner demon, who will show up later for a duel. Win and you'll get your resources back. Lose and too bad, so sad, they will be gone. You can reduce your madness by killing infected enemies, beating the demon, or donating to shrines. It's not in your face constantly, which is very nice, but once it does ramp up, it gives you something to think about between fights. Enemy variety is pretty much the same. Like most of the Souls-likes, you start to see more variety in the mid to late portion of the game, but I'd say there's probably noticeably less variety here compared to your typical Souls-like. You'll see one set of enemies for a stretch of the game, then once you hit that shift of the A to B moment, the enemy types change, but after that point, they're mostly the same again. Each section has its own pool, but there's not a lot of crossover or shake-up, so once you've adjusted to what there is, you won't see much else. This isn't a very huge issue for me because the combinations are used fairly well and mob density makes a lot of sense, except for some late game portions where there is definitely a padded difficulty with the density, but at that point, I think you're practiced enough and you're strong enough that it doesn't really matter. There is quite a decent amount of lore in the game, and there are 5 endings, so depending on how your run plays out and what choices you've made, that can keep you busy for a while. But for the most part, the story takes a pretty solid backseat. If you're someone who fathoms reading every bit of dialogue and piecing the lore together, there's some solid replay value in there, especially if you want to complete all of the endings. But if you're just here for that challenge and the thrill of death, it's a pretty short ride. You'll see most of what the game has to offer in 1, maybe 2 runs, and the story isn't really doing much to pull you back unless you're already deep into the lore of the world. With all that said, I have to be fair and mention, this game is getting horribly review bombed online for a bunch of different reasons, controversies, performance issues, but some of it is fairly overblown. Personally, I enjoyed my experience enough that it was a fun time, but it definitely felt like it wasn't hitting its full potential. It's one of those games that needed more time in the oven. The controls really don't feel good, and the technical issues did sour the experience somewhat. And at the end of the day, polishing your products matter. Having said that, it was a solid 30-something hours of decent fun without asking for too much in return aside from the cost of the game. In today's world of gaming, to me, that's pretty solid and very valuable. If you have never tried a Souls or a Souls-like game before, you might not enjoy this enough to stick around. However, if these are your kind of games, you'll find something here to enjoy. Maybe even like, but just be warned, you may not love it, depending on your taste. I feel like Wuchang will most likely see more patches in the future, and I'm curious to see how that might shape the game. With a few more updates, I could definitely see myself coming back to this one within the year and hopefully having a better time, because the bones here are fairly strong. And I feel like Wuchang is definitely a great reminder that not every game has to be a AAA Game of the Year masterpiece. Some games can simply be a short, good amount of a fun time. I thank you for tuning in as always. It's a very busy time of the year for games, so more reviews to come soon, and I appreciate all of your support. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.